What's up, Bear Nation? I'm Bear with BearIndependent.com. Today, what I want to talk to you guys and girls about is imports versus exports. On the macro scale, international, geopolitical scale, and then on the micro scale, your household. And I realize that in the world of preparedness, this is probably not a super sexy topic because we're not going to talk about plate carriers and AR-15s and night vision or even, freeze-dried long-term food storage or all the things that get people spun up in a tizzy. The, click here, buy now. American consumerism solved the problem with fiat currency. Although we'll touch on that later in the video. So not a sexy concept, but I've always contended that not starving to death is sexy. Not becoming a battlefield casualty is sexy. Perpetuating normalcy for the people that I love, that's sexy. So, imports versus exports. On the macro scale right now, we're seeing the countries that are doing the best amid the global pandemic and the resulting global recession that's now imminent are those that are producers of things like food and energy and raw commodities. Everybody is going to take a hit. Globally speaking, every nation is in the process of taking a hit. But the ones that are doing the worst in all this are the ones that are the most dependent upon imports of food and energy and raw commodities. They consume more than they produce, and in many cases, you look at isolated nations, island chains, or nations that are landlocked that don't have the ability to transport goods and services, they're not doing so hot. The CCP, Chinese Communist Party, which the fact that I said that will put trolls, bots, in the comments now, because that's how YouTube works. That's okay. The CCP, which many people, myself included at times, have been concerned with, perhaps overly concerned with, as the arch nemesis to the United States of America, as of the time of this recording, seems to be in the process of failing. It may have already failed by the time this video posts because of a run on their banks, because of people thought they were putting money into savings accounts and checking accounts, but they were actually investing in bank products, which made their money property of the bank rather than, because it was an investment, rather than, holding it in a safe account, like we would think of here in the United States of America, like an FDIC insured checking or savings account. Additionally, China imports somewhere around 85% of both its food and its fuel. That's a problem. They're not doing so hot, and they could potentially fail, at least the Chinese Communist Party. Many analysts are forecasting within the next decade, if not within the next couple of weeks, will fail because their ability to control things based on central planning is not working out. Because when there's no raw inputs, there's nothing to centrally plan. Versus a country like the United States, which even as we think that things are getting bad here, and they certainly are getting worse than they were, the United States is both the primary exporter, the number one exporter of food and energy in the world. Doesn't mean things aren't going to get bad here. I think they are. They're certainly going to get worse than they are. But our ability to weather that storm, the global recession, is probably, asterisk caveat, probably going to be better than many other nations in the world. What does that mean for you and your household? Well, think about your household. The vast majority of American households, and for our international audience, the vast majority of households, period, are importers. You import electricity through the wires that are run to your house. You import, that's energy. You import food via grocery bags that come out of the back of your SUV or your sedan. after you go to the store and go pick it up, right? Commodities and tools, whether it's ball canning jars or Klein line pliers or ammunition or whatever it may be. These are all things that you are importing into your domicile. I would contend that if we take the macro model and apply it on the micro to your household, that the best way for you to weather the storm that is coming, whatever that might look like, global recession, highly probable, not just possible, but highly probable. As a result of that, what are we going to see? Look, there's a little birdie on this big piece of silver maple back here. What are we going to see? More civil unrest. There will be fewer people in the workforce because there are fewer jobs, because it's going to take a hot minute to spin back up American manufacturing and nearshore or onshore all of the things that we gave away during our period of rampant globalization over the last 30 years, right? That's going to take some time to build that back up. And it's going to take capital to build that back up as well. And there's only so many things that the people with capital can invest in at one time, right? But civil unrest, very likely, because people who don't have a place to live and don't have food to eat will behave badly, which comes back to population density for you. If you're surrounded by more people that are going to behave badly than you are people that are going to behave well, you have a strategic issue. That's why you might consider strategic relocation, come out of her, my people. And you might not. That's up to you. But civil unrest for sure. Shortages and scarcity, because there are fewer commodities, fewer supplies on the global market because manufacturing globally is taking a hit, right? And so importing or producing the raw commodities, for example, take something like corn that's a high nitrogen feeder, and globally nitrogen and potash are off the market between Russia and China. Russia being the number one exporter globally of fertilizer, it's a strategic issue for Russia. They're not going to export fertilizer because the land that Russia has, the arable land that they have, isn't great land anyway. So they need as much fertilizer as they can get going into a period of scarcity, which means here in the United States, something like corn, you see many farmers right now that are switching from corn, which is a high nitrogen feeder, to other crops that aren't or are less intensive. Plus, you look at the green energy initiative that we have, a lot of that corn, granted it's not necessarily human grade corn, dent corn, feed corn, field corn, pick your poison, is being used to make ethanol for gasoline, which has its own issues, especially if you're a guy who's into small engines like I am. But scarcity of food because of all those things, right? Those two things, civil unrest and scarcity of food, have the ability, the likelihood to lead to increased tyranny because all governments strive to maintain legitimacy over those that they govern. And legitimacy is basically the ability to provide, dare I say, representation and food and security and the basic needs, the basic necessities of the constituency. Because if the government can't provide those things to you, why would you continue to interact with said government? The short answer is you won't, which could potentially lead to balkanization. And there's a series of dominoes that will fall one upon the next because of these issues, potentially. So all of those indicators, all of those threat matrices produce a situation where on the micro, one would be better off being a producer, not a consumer. An exporter, if you will, rather than an importer. Rather than importing electricity from the grid, which we know is unreliable and fragile. How many warnings have we seen about that? Rather than importing security from your local police department, which is, and I'm taking nothing away from the efforts of the fine men and women in uniform, but they're understaffed, they're overworked. Many of them have already blown their budgets for things like fuel, so they're not responding to calls right now. Same thing with EMS. So security and medical. The medical system in the United States of America is collapsing because there's a lack of labor and there's a lack of stuff. Everything from Ativan to IV fluids to 22 gauge butterfly needles to gauze to you pick your poison. It's not there. Why? Because manufacturing concerns in the United States have been offshored for decades. And it's like I said, it's going to take time to bring that back. So you should probably have the ability to produce your own security and handle your own minor to intermediate medical concerns. That's going to take training and education on your part, right? What about food? The most basic of commodities. Give us this day our daily bread, right? Where does your daily bread come from? And for many of us, myself included most days, it comes off the shelf at Walmart or the local grocery store. But you may have seen what prices are doing. They're jumping through the roof. You add into the logistical concerns that come from trucker issues, the constraints that have been put on the American trucking industry through COVID and through emissions laws and a shortage of diesel exhaust fluid and the cost of diesel and the unavailability of replacement parts for vehicles and trucks being taken out of service by DOT because they have a cracked windshield. It's not a deal breaker, there's just a crack in the windshield, but you can't get more windshields because they don't exist. All these things are bringing trucking and also train transportation, rail freight, to its knees, which means it's becoming harder and harder, producing scarcity for you to get food at the store. And in many cases, you're lucky if there's bread. Not necessarily the bread that you like, just bread, or cereal, or milk, or eggs, basic stuff. And if it is there, it's probably not your brand, and it's probably 2 or 3 times more expensive than it was a year ago, which gets back to production. I firmly believe in strategic relocation. I think you guys know this. And if you live in a place where you cannot produce food, I don't think that that is long-term viable for survivability. It also begs the question of what particularly are you preparing for? For me, it's a systemic collapse. And I think it's going to go out with, the system is going to go out with a whimper, not a bang. There's a possibility always that it goes out with a bang. But I think it's going to be more of a whimper. I think we are in the midst of a slow, steady decline, in some cases planned and coordinated by the big they, to diminish the United States on the world stage, to have equality across the world. And in order to bring other people up to our level, the big they see the necessity to bring us down to their level, to level the playing field. Okay? But this gets back to food production. You need to be able to produce food. The caloric king of food are tubers, stuff that grows beneath the ground. Potatoes, radishes, rutabagas, yams, etc. Next from there are grains, corn, rice, wheat, beans. And I know beans are legumes, but I lump them in there because those 4 things, corn, rice, wheat, and beans, are all roughly 1,600 calories per pound. So a pound of that per day will provide basic sustenance. 2 pounds of that per day will provide the number of calories you need, approximately 3,200 calories per day, to not lose muscle mass while engaged in strenuous activity. And I would submit that as things continue to slide on the downward spiral of economic crisis and potentially collapse in the United States of America, you will be engaged in more physical activity, whether that's splitting this firewood back here, or tilling your garden, or working your garden, or patrolling your property, or whatever it is. You are going to have to do more stuff because the system is incapable of doing that stuff for you. So all this to say, if we look at the macro trends around the globe, the winners right now and the potential winners are those who are producing, they're exporting stuff. And the losers are those who are importing or consuming stuff, whatever that stuff might be. Just look at Germany and Russia right now with gas pipelines, the Nord Stream pipelines. How's that going? And see, Russia has Germany by the short and curlies because Germany has to have that natural gas so that their people don't freeze to death. And maybe more importantly for Germany, economically speaking, all of their heavy industry runs on gas. So they have a huge economic exposure there with that lack of natural gas from Russia. That's one example of one commodity on the world stage. Think about your house now on the micro. What are all of the things that you are importing as a nation of you? The nation of Phil, the nation of Tina, okay? Your household, what are you importing? And for most of us in the United States of America, it's energy, it's food, it's security, it's medical, it's education, and many other things. All of these things that with time and effort, with some elbow grease and the good old American can-do attitude, we can take personal responsibility for and be in a much more resilient position. And for those who have been playing along in the home game, reading Resistance Operating Concept by Otto Fiala, it should be clear to you now, for everybody who talks about resistance, we have to resist tyranny. And I agree. You cannot affect resistance without resilience. And resilience, for many of us, from a preparedness standpoint, begins with buying a bunch of stuff and putting it on shelves and closets and in buckets and in the basement and in the garage. Okay, that's resilience. But that's consumerism, consumption resilience. How about production resilience? Because now you're truly ungovernable. Doesn't matter if there's no bread at the store. I have tons, literal, of wheat and 2 different grinders and more yeast than I know, and baking soda and baking powder and fats and oils and a solar oven and a big green egg and an electric oven and a wood-fired oven. I have some resilience there when it comes to give me this day my daily bread. And this is not a prepper flex. It's taken me a decade and a half to get to this point. But my point is, the whole point of this is that we have to maintain some type of resilience. That's really what we're trying to do when we prepare, to be resilient to weather whatever storm may come. And the best form of resilience is production. It's being a net exporter of commodities, not a net importer of commodities. That's the thought I wanted to implant in your brain today. I'm interested in your productive comments down below. Bless y'all. Shalom.